Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group and proud host of VFE. And today's guest I have known for probably about 3 or 4 years now, but I would say she is one of the best conversationists to me. And what I mean by that is the depth and breadth of our conversations regarding education, speaking specifically on data, which I love to talk about, education theory. And she has just became a very, very, very good and close friend of mine. We were just talking before the podcast was launching about how, we were talking a couple weeks ago and then about education, where it's leading towards. Then I remember a conversation we had, I think, Roxanna, it was the month before that, where we were just talking about some of the things that are happening at the federal level and how this is impacting education in totality. And again, like I said, just a well-respected educator out of California, beloved by many. And of course, Roxanne, I'm going to say this right on air, absolutely love you. To my audience off the phone, very some back and forth, but that's what brothers and sisters do. And it is just an absolute honor to bring on Roxanna Villasenor. I always mess up your name, but I got that correct, right? Yes, yes, yes. That's maybe the second time in 4 years, Roxanna. But yes, she is a former superintendent, well-recognized educator, has been through the whole trajectory of education from classrooms, leading schools, leading central office, focused on academics, most recently served as superintendent, and now is the proud CEO of Universal Leadership and Associates. So without further ado, from the Sacramento area, right? We're not doing that little Southern California thing. We're going back up to the Bay in Northern California, where Roxanna is. Roxanna, welcome to VFE. Listen, sister, it is so good to see you and to have you on the podcast finally. But here's the thing, Roxanna, I asked you about 4 years ago. So it took us 4 years for you to get on VFE.
Yes, yeah, it took a little bit of time, you know, and you had some work to do, you were building, you were growing, and look at you. Look what you've accomplished in such a short period of time.
I appreciate it, Roxanna. And, I tell you this, many of our conversations, you provided that encouragement to keep on going, to keep building, to keep, just to stay at it. And, from me to you, thank you, good sister, for always having my back, but moreover, really, really keeping me stimulated with a lot of things going on in education, specifically what's going on in California. So truly appreciate you. But now you're on. You ready to be on the hot seat?
I'm ready. Let's see how I do.
Oh, you're gonna listen. You're gonna. It's always a mic drop with you. To my audience, we were on a podcast together where we were doing jointly, probably a couple years ago, if you remember. And Roxanna, you were on fire. It was to a point, Roxanna, I was taking notes, and when I was asked a question, I was still taking my notes down from you.
Well, I think it was the use of data, and so for me, being a math science person, I majored in biology, taught math and science in high school for students and, uh, numbers and, always, it's something that I enjoy to do.
Yeah, we always all the data geeks find some type of way to come together and find each other. I always say that. Join the club, good sister. But Roxana, for my audience, right? Because obviously I have so much and tremendous amount of respect of what you're doing personally and professionally. But for my audience that do not know who you are, know your trajectory in education, what song would best describe your leadership signature in this AC stage of education, which is after COVID-19?
Rise Up by Aja Day. So, I feel like and I think that many of us who experience the trials and tribulations associated with working through COVID, recovering from COVID, trying to stabilize and achieve our results, it requires that resilience, overcoming the challenge, the empowerment and lifting one another, the inspiration for change despite those challenges. And I know this was one question that you gave me an opportunity to be reflective on. And so, like, when I dug into the lyrics even further, just because it's a song that resonates with me, but I mean, just even some of the verses, having each other through for hope. In spite of the ache, will continue to rise. And when you're broken down and tired, I mean, how many of us as educators and leaders in this space have felt defeated in moments, but we continue to fight and we continue to lift and empower one another, and we do it again and again. Sometimes it's overwhelming, sometimes it's defeating, but we continue to get up and put one foot in front of the other and for the benefit of one another, not just for ourselves. So that's the song for me that resonates most.
And that does resonate in you, Roxana. And when I look at some of these, I like to say these really broad themes that you provided. One word that sticks out to me, and I think that, when we start examining, all right, I always like to say in these isolated tenets or these core threads in education, specifically in the AC stage of education, we have to be able to empower people, right? And we have to move away from this standard managerial type of implementation or operation that education has pretty much been underscored for over 275 years, but empowering, inspiring. I think we need that now, that element of hope. We're seeing a lot of things happen at, the federal level, at the state levels, even at the local level, where hope can be lost. But I don't want to lose hope, right? And I think that you're bringing that up because we have to be able to rise up to that. But that level of hope and empowerment, right? When we think about how do we elevate generation alpha, generation beta, how do we create these new structures and systems in education, we really have to, I like to say, promulgate both empowerment and hope. But rise up is such a good song. I today's quote, or I should say from my leadership tip, was Still I Rise. So when we think about Rise Up and Still I Rise, intersectionality in the context of themes of what you talked about, empowerment and hope. But Roxana, in this AC stage of education, and this is why I love talking to you, speaking to you about education, because your perspective is bold, right? You have you epitomize the name of my book, intentional, bold, and unapologetic. And I think we need more leaders in the AC stage of education that are going to be intentional with the work, bold for our students, and unapologetic because we're trying to elevate our students. But you have intentionally and boldly designed these systems that facilitate new learning dimensions and paths for our generational learners, generation alpha and generation beta. From your context as an experienced leader, right? How do we start the necessary cultural and mindset shifts while simultaneously communicating a compelling vision for what I'm calling this 22nd century?
I think first it's just to understand the characteristics of each of those generations. And I think the hardest part is taking ownership of how we embrace or live out those identified characteristics. Like as a Gen Xer, I don't want to be identified as a tech adopter. I want to be recognized as a tech just savvy and immersed in the technology. But the reality is based on my exposure and progression through the years, I adjusted and adopted and embraced what was made available at the time. Whereas our alpha generation, they don't have to go through that progression. They're immersed. They're communicating and they celebrate and recognize the diversity where we came in an era where the diversity was something that was conversation that we had to fight to put on the table. So recognize where we are in the spectrum, those characteristics, and of course we have our own individuality that's present there, but seeking to understand each of those characteristics and then build systems to create bridges between these generations would be key. A big piece would be just the mentorship, like mentorship and learning from one another and for the opportunity to have shared experiences, wisdom that maybe technology or the just the knowledge base is one thing, but the wisdom through the lived experiences should be shared for the opportunity for successorship, maintaining that growth mindset, collaboration. I mean, like these are not unique and just mind-blowing concepts, but the execution and the boldness and being unapologetic in the implementation of this work is what is required. We have the knowledge, we have the awareness, but how do we incorporate it to from the things that we've learned? I mean, COVID was what it was, but it definitely propelled us into the dependency and the awareness and the leveraging of technology. And so, how we engage through the use of technology is going to be our connection through our generational pools. Um, and then also maintaining a shared focus on our values. Like we might have characteristics that are unique to the generations, but our values, there's a through line within that that could be highlighted. That sense of social responsibility, the commitment. How do we use our strengths and our unique attributes to come together to train one another, leverage technology, explore working spaces, and incorporate that into our school space as well.
Yeah. Roxana, I really appreciate the intentionality of interfacing culture with these new dimensions of the 22nd century that I highlight, whether it be through various keynotes or various work that I'm doing internationally, domestically, or even through my 22nd century education model. And to my audience, why I say that is that Roxana is highlighting the demographic shift that we're seeing in education. By 2028, I just received new data, Roxanne, that the now before it was by 2026, 56 or 57% of our students, I'm sorry, 56% of our students was going to be Black and Brown, right, in public education or education totality across the country. Now, by 2028, that has increased up to 60% now. So and I think you and I when we were on the phone together, could have been this month or last month, I kept saying, I just don't understand where there's this tension, and now you add in the dynamic or the dimension of being, or of the political tension, I should say, about addressing and underscoring and unpacking diversity in our schools when we have this forecastic demographic shift of an increase up to 60% by 2028. That's roughly 3 years away. But I love the intentionality where you are intersecting these systems, right, that acknowledges our student demographics and focusing on the 22nd century, which is being underpinned by technology and artificial intelligence. But you go back to the values, right? And I want to unpack this as a sub question, Roxana, because when we think about values, specifically in a learning organization, and to find, let's say, the values that the learning organization or the district has adopted, and try to ensure those values are integrated into all of our systems and all of our classrooms. Um, with the shift now, right? With some of the political contention that we're seeing now, how do we get to this level of being apolitical and ensuring that our values are truly focusing on just the preparation of generation alpha and generation beta that's obsolete of all this the political conundrums that we're facing in the world? Values is core within a learning organization. Can you unpack that a little bit further for us?
I'll just say that personally, my maintaining truth and allegiance to what I value has been the one thing that's kept me centered, especially in the most difficult of times. And I think that when we explore as an organization where we believe our values to lie, like what validation can be seen? What data demonstrates that, or actions or systems are put in place that reflect our values? Do our scheduling and inclusive practices, do our resources align? Do the conversations on topic align with our values? And I'm wondering, even if we were to use those AI systems to evaluate our conversations, I'm wondering, as a system, how do we leverage the technology or take the opportunity to say, okay, these are our identified values. And then we cross reference it to the conversation that was had how are those values reflected in the conversation or aligned? I know that there's themes that come up in conversations. The tones are positive, negative, or neutral, or the frequency of who's talking in those otter AI systems. However, if we were to take that and build a value system that we say we're committed to, and then evaluate our conversations, our actions, our data, I mean, I think that that would be a great opportunity to see if we are actually executing and living out what we say and commit to as a values as an organization and as an individual group of people.
Well stated, Roxana. Well stated. Well stated. I think if we can be able to truly be able to now, and I think this is going to be a huge endeavor for any leader, any learning organization, any governance body, is to create alignment or create this mental model around having shared values. And I hope education can get to that level, right? Because we're seeing a lot of, I like to say, where if we're trying to underpin values within our organizations and within our schools, politics should be obsolete of in education. And this is where these conflicting values are really coming into our classrooms. And who are they impacting? Our most important customers, our families, and our students.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point when you consider the fact that politics should be obsolete. When you think about education and politics in mainstream society, wasn't it education used as the platform to reinforce those values and practices and belief systems that we wanted our democracy and our government system to embrace? And I think that's the biggest pull. Our biggest pull is our top leaders are leaders of Generation X or above or older, and they're trying to reinforce these values that our younger generations are not embracing and accepting because it's not inclusive of them, and it was not designed and made with them in mind, and so it'll be I do believe it should be obsolete of education should not be inclusive of politics. However, education has been the vehicle in which our political beliefs were reinforced. And so now those beliefs are shifting and we have major conflict, but that fear of releasing or shifting or viewing our belief systems to, or our values to have shifted, while the desire to maintain a certain system or certain way of practice or certain beliefs no longer apply to the larger population, which I think is going to contribute to our alpha and beta generations being more embracive and more inclusive and more committed to the social justice and diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. Well stated, Roxana. And if you think about it, Generation Alpha, Generation Beta, the most diverse generations, two or more races when we think about it. So you're absolutely well stated. To my audience, that's one of those answers. I always like to say those are one of those Roxana nuggets, right? Roxana be dropping nuggets all the time that you just like, oh wow, I didn't even think about that. Put that down. But yes, replay that. We use this Roxana as an asynchronous professional learning tool, pedagogy, self-directed learning, to be able to unpack, to be able to unwrap specific concepts that our guests have. And that was one of the answers. But Roxana, as a leader in this digital paradigm, you started to elaborate on it with regards to the generational differences, right? I always say, Roxana, we can't educate our students how we were educated, right? You have some beautiful Gen Zers that are in your house. I have a Generation Alpha student, and I can tell you the way we were educated, knowing how your kids are, knowing my son, that would just completely, yeah, pull the hair out of my head, right? Type. But Roxana, seeing this as a mother of Gen Zers, right? This digital paradigm, adaptability and agility are the constant that they immerse themselves in, and then from an economic demand standpoint, and specifically in the context of organizational and site-based norms, right? We have to be able to now apply that within our schools, our learning ecosystems, leadership practices. But what the failure is expected from a research and development standpoint is how do we scale these impactful systems, for generation alpha, generation beta. So in a traditional mindset of education, right, when we think about this word failure is considered bad. But I want to be able to look at this from an R&D standpoint because this is again an outlier practice, a 22nd century practice, but an outlier practice to the traditional norms of education. We have to look at failure as growth for learning and progress. So for a leader, Roxana, for a leader that wants to establish cultural norms of the latter, failure, as I like to say, the anchor for growth, learning, and progress, how do we unpack failure as learning in our organizations and schools? And what are the leadership lessons for sustained change management from failure?
Well, I think we each have to evaluate our own relationship with failure. And as I'm hearing you share and process and think through this, I personally, when asked, like, what is your greatest fear? My greatest fear for so many years has been failure. And where the shift now is happening, and I think it was just there was this desired outcome, desired goal, but recognizing that the journey is equally important. And so the failure should be seen as an opportunity. It's like an immediate feedback. And if we consider failure as feedback, then it would be an opportunity to drive innovation. And if we're truly about the cycle of continuous improvement, failure has to be part of that process. And the progression, the learning, the data analysis that happens through the failure and and the adaptability and the creativeness that can come from it. And so the adaptability, not
And Roxanne, if I can interject, because I normally don't interject with my guests when they're presenting their answers, but this is so resonating because the journey, I want my audience to focus on that. The journey is equally important. If you can, before you continue with your answer, unpack that journey is equally important through this, I like to say, throughput of failure, because Roxana, not many people are intentional about the journey or speak about the journey and how failure, as you stated, elicits innovation. So I apologize if you can expand on that point, because the journey is equally important and we don't talk about the journey enough and the failures that led us to where we're going to be at, or the outcome within the journey, please.
so I spend a lot of time reflecting on myself as a leader, and I think about myself over time. And so I think about this push to reach these levels of destination. And I personally have been in spaces where I've been so focused on the outcome that and maybe the rush to get there, that I haven't been reflective enough of the journey, and maybe the journey was the purpose. And and because the outcome, depending on how long it takes you to get there, may have shifted, but we're so focused on it, we're not able to reflect and think of how we need to adjust maybe our outcome if we haven't been reflective on the value of the journey. And so as an individual, that's my perspective. And I could just only transform that perspective into the learning. Like, we spend so many years or time focusing on our desired outcome, but our populations are changing. How have we adjusted our desired outcome to match what we've learned along the way?
Absolutely, absolutely. And Roxana, thank you for that. And please continue on. But to my audience is we have to, and I always say this, Roxana, we have to embrace the journey, because when we think about holistically, reauthoring, or this strategic reauthorization of education, it is going to be a journey over time with ample and multiple failures, because we're not going to get the system right correctly. We got to continuously to iterate this prototype. And you speak that technical language, that very scientific language as well. because it is going to be a long, hard journey where the desired outcome, there's going to be immense level of flexibility and adjustments because of the quote unquote failure. And this is another episode, Roxanne, that we can go into unpacking failure with six different questions and six different ways. But I think we have to look at failure differently, because now in the AC stage of education, I always ask myself, I always ask people, define failure. What does that look like? And do not give me a letter grade with a 59 and below is failure. What does that look like? What does it feel like? But what does it look like to be able to ascend to the next step based off of that learning? And I loved how you stated it. It drives innovation within this continuous improvement. Absolutely. Continuous improvement is rooted on what? Multiple tenets of failure in new learning. So eloquently put it, but go ahead, continue with your answer, Roxanne.
I just think building on that, just think about the opportunity to reinforce and create resilience through the idea that failure is inevitable and the opportunity to respond. I mean, the age old, it's not the failure, it's or the challenge, it's how you respond to the challenge that defines you. And why does that not apply here? And the opportunity to reinforce resiliency and build that within our leaders, our educators, our students is a great opportunity. And I do believe in this era of technology and this digital era, there's so many things that we do not know yet, and so the need for agility, the need for adaptability, the need for failing forward to learn through like maybe, I mean, is success, like if we've reached and achieved this level of success and we met our deadline or outcome, desired outcome, did we, is that it? Like we met it. Now what? Like we have no more to do? Like we have no opportunity for growth? And so perhaps meeting what we recognize as success so soon is more of a failure than actually working through to continually try to improve whatever it is that we think, we're on the trajectory to achieve.
Roxanne, excellent, 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 excellent statements. And this actually is a good segue into our next question, right? Because when I think of resilience, I think of our multilingual learners. And I know you are a huge, huge proponent, a strategic expert that a lot of people depend upon around strategies, around methodologies, approaches. When it comes to our multilingual learners, you have championed them throughout your whole career. And thank you. And I think that now, when we speak of this student group, we have to champion them even more. But first, right, what are the specific, and I want my audience to really unpack your instructional prowess or your instructional acumen, I should say, with regards to specific pedagogies aligned to our multilingual learners. But then also I want to be able to get into your systems level expertise around programmatic shifts, right? So in the context of instruction, what needs to be rooted in every school, every district for this student group? And from a programmatic standpoint, what needs to be rooted in every school and learning organization for this student group? That's the first question. Second question, you already know, Roxanne, I got these multi-tier questions. I apologize in advance, but you have many conversations, so the prerequisite is not new to you. But the second is, how do we incorporate our multilingual learners and their families to ensure they have a meaningful voice in the design, the implementation, and the articulation of our schools and learning organizations? So two-part.
So I think as I'm hearing and processing and building off of the earlier part of the conversation, what do we believe and what do we value about our multilingual students and families and capabilities? And so I think that maybe even starting there and having a real conversation about that as a system and make some commitments. So that could be something that's revisited as we're struggling and failing forward to meet these desired outcomes. Of course, equity, inclusive practices, but what does that look like? And how is that implemented at the ground level? I think that all students English only speaking students, multilingual students, students with disabilities, all have the individual need and attention to have access and opportunities to learn in a way that is unique to their styles. And so I strongly believe in the universal design for learning because there's avenues, there's opportunities, there's strategies for that would allow for students to have engagement or expression to demonstrate mastery and also like with educators having some sort of differentiated instructional training or professional development that meets because our educators are unique learners as well and have a journey. And so investing and continuing to invest and engage in those conversations for them to feel successful so that they feel equipped. And then continuing to make adjustments through the data decision making process. And of course, this is all where MTSS, the multi-tiered systems of support, and actually in my panel this last week, when they asked me to consider a reimagination of MTSS, I thought maybe it's multi-tiered, multilingual, multidimensional systems of support because it's so layered and we're more than just the LPAC scores. We're more than just a standardized test. We're individuals that come with unique styles that should be honored through the learning journey. They cannot be honored if we don't equip our educators and support them to engage in these conversations safely. It's okay if we didn't hit this mark, but what are we going to do and how do we make adjustments, engaging in those reflective opportunities and having data that's readily available in a timely manner, and then providing those immediate supports to students would be key. Systematically, I think looking at master scheduling practices or how are we supporting and working together as a team? So for, what's typically known as what I need when time to provide designated ELD supports, how are we leveraging our kinder and TK teachers to be incorporated in that time if we schedule that time in the end of the day so that they can provide the supports to their students? How are we demonstrating value and importance of incorporating ELD standards during integrated ELD standards? Do we find value and benefit? Um, Perhaps if we were to provide a whole class, regardless if they qualify an LPAC assessment, it would be interesting to see how they did. And maybe that would be a motivation for our teachers to incorporate the ELD standards with some intentionality and recognizing that all it's doing is providing access. And now let's explore some scaffolded ways or differentiated structures of engagement or opportunities to demonstrate mastery that I believe is beneficial to all students, not just our multilingual learners.
Roxana, great response with that access opportunity. Roxana, for my audience, and this has been one of the feedback points I receive, is that we say a lot of theory, we unpack a lot of high level research based scientific concepts. If you can, and I always get emails back, doc, can you make sure that you have your guest be able to unpack some of those theories and those concepts that they present. So for my audience standpoint, to create level set or level setting with regards to this, can you unpack and explain what universal design for learning is for my audience?
So, universal design for learning is matrix or strategies on how to address very different learners. So
Mhm.
it's an engagement strategy. It's various strategies. If you recognize that a student is struggling in a particular area, you have strategies or ways to engage the student that would allow them to feel like they can. Maybe there's more of the visual. I mean, it's just differentiated instruction, but there's a matrix, there's a standard, there's training that's associated, there's belief systems that are incorporated, and it's the recognition that each student is different. And so it's a tool, I guess it's a toolkit for teachers to have access to a bank of strategies, approaches, mastery demonstration. I mean, things in ways that students have an opportunity to feel successful through that learning.
Yeah, and what I'm grateful for is how you unpack that. In essence, really, I like to say, enhance and differentiate in instruction. And I always use this as kind of like this, the alignment piece with it from pedagogy and andragogy. And if we think about the universal design for learning, that whole UDL concept, I mean, it really parallels adult learning. If we when we think about creating these inclusive learning ecosystems, that is exactly what you're talking about. Access and opportunities when they ask you to challenge the status quo of the MTSS implementation, where flexibility is embedded within there, as you stated, with all students, that is that intentional transition to a learning ecosystem. So as you highlighted these specific strategies and practices within the UDL framework, I always say that we need to have a framework of UDL for our educators and leaders as we move this historically binary operating business model of education to exactly what you're calling for, these inclusive 22nd century learning ecosystems. So when we talk about these ecosystems, Roxana, we're getting old because five years away from 5 years away from 2030, right? And when I think about that, like, ooh, 5 years away, my son is going to be a teenager by then. But when we think about most studies underpinning the future of education, how they're outlining this 2030, 2035 timeline, Roxana, in accordance to you, what are the non-negotiables that must be prioritized to be future driven and AC ready, AC stage ready within this 2030 to 2035 timeline? And then also, Roxana, to underscore that, how do we frame these priorities when they're already competing and compelling factors that already exist within our learning organizations and schools today?
I think we need the strategic foresight and adaptability. We need to be able to think beyond what is available to us so that we can prepare for that next phase and really the 22nd century, as you stated, and beyond. So, equity through access to education and continuing with that work in a meaningful way, in a real way, looking at the technology access in this shift, identifying and framing and leveraging technology to provide some connectivity to the curriculum, connected to the standards, while maintaining a sensitivity to our mental health supports, building the digital literacy. So access to education is definitely a non-negotiable. And then considering the future ready workforce development. Like we have a lot of priority within our CTE pathways, like partnering with businesses, identifying what the demand is and how are we building and contributing and setting our students up for that platform, the integration of technology so that we can leverage these for the personalized learning. I mean, UDL is one way, but how can the technology and the AI structures be leveraged to provide the access and ongoing professional development to keep up with those changes is definitely, and I mean, what's not going away, and we've opened the door, and I'm glad we're not going backwards because there was a time where social emotional was just non-existent. We didn't talk about mental health and social emotional supports and learning, but we also learned that through technology, there's an increased need for it, and there's more acceptance in the conversation. So, how do we incorporate and balance that, and incorporate partners in our community to support that? And the increased stress, because with technology comes the demand for more productivity. So the management of the stress and the awareness of where we are and continuing to maintain that emotional intelligence that could get lost if we stay behind a screen, and then the resiliency. So those, and then the continuation of cultivating the leadership for our staff. And I think thinking beyond our local space. So global citizenship and society. I think through the technology space, we can get lost in losing an element of that. But our environmental literacy, acting on global issues, service projects, leadership, I mean, being good contributors And being out there will also contribute to what more is needed, what more can I do to generate that inner creative thinking to be responsive to society and contributing members.
Yeah. Roxanne, I appreciate your response, specifically when you started to talk about strategic foresight and adaptability within our organizations. One of my professors at Harvard, Michael Tushman, he wrote the book Lead and Disrupt. And I remember in class one time, he always stated that the hardest thing to shift is not the hardware of an organization, structure systems, core tenets, work processes, but the hardest thing to shift is around the software. And and when I look at your answer, specifically when we talk about 22nd century readiness and preparing our students for the future of the world, future of the work, we cannot eliminate or politicize social emotional supports and mental health supports. When we unpack truly, I had a deep conversation yesterday with somebody, a superintendent in our country or here domestically. We started to look at various SEL elements and indicators and started to do an intentional crosswalk with indicators within her portrait of a graduate. And when we think about the indicators within the various elements of the portrait of a graduate, you have to have specific power skills, SEL, however we want to contextualize it to soften it so we won't politically, offend somebody. But those embedded SEL power skills is the only way to elevate and prepare our students or elevate the indicators within the portrait of a graduate to be able to prepare our students for the 22nd century and the new demands within our economic demands. So I truly appreciate, right, Roxana, for bringing this up because when we talk about global citizenship, our students need those essential skills, those power skills, those SEL indicator out or turned into specific competencies in order to realize what is in our portrait of a graduate. Global citizenship, that is a 22nd century skill, right? Or I should say, is a part of the development of what I call the multi environmental talents of our students. If we think about what the UAE did, they pretty much facilitated Chat GPT 4. They gave it to everybody across the country. If you think about China, China has 4 to 6 hours of embedded AI instruction, but there's also what they don't say about China and about the UAE is how they're providing these core complements of skills, of competencies, of talents to leverage this technology. So you're absolutely correct about that, specifically around workforce development. Workforce development is global citizenship because why? Our students, Generation Alpha and Beta, they have the globe in our hand. But Roxana, last question. You made it through VFE. Oh man, Roxana, I'll probably to my audience, I'll probably get a phone call later on tonight and have some. Why are you asking those type of questions? But Roxanne, I know I can't limit you on this, good sister. I know I can't, but I'm gonna try to. You only have 3 words to answer this question. Now, nobody listens to me because they always extend upon this, but I'm gonna try to limit you to 3 words. I'm probably, and I'm using this from past statistical trends of us. I'm not gonna limit you to 3 words. But Roxana, what 3 words do you want our audience to leave with today regarding excellence in the context of awe, because you believe in awe, in the context of awe in the AC stage of education?
Equity, innovation, resilience. So I think, of course, equity, I mean, that's a non negotiable. And we need to have access to the tools, to the resources, to the opportunities that can be seen through all the different things that we talked about, the curriculum, the supports required, the differentiation, the the consideration of how we're preparing them for that future. The innovation, that's bold. That's bold, and we need to embrace the innovation. so that we can continue to evolve. And that's part of the failure. That's part of the progress monitoring. That's the data that will give us the immediate feedback to determine what is required for continued evolution and growth. And then the resilience. It's going to be difficult. It is tough. And we are meeting it through our innovative thinking. We're meeting it through taking care of ourselves and taking care of one another, working in communities in collaboration, inclusive of our parents and our stakeholders and our leaders, of course, and, and lean into our students. Our students are very keen, especially our up and coming. They have access to so much. And be okay with, as a teacher, learning and facilitating the learning of a student, not having the idea necessarily that we need to know more than the student to be a teacher of our students. So resiliency for adults as well as students, and being intentional and recognizing and celebrating when those moments to learn present themselves.
Equity, innovation, and resilience. Roxanna Villasenor, thank you for coming on VFE. And Roxanna, a lot of my audience, they reach out to my guests that come on our podcast series. So if they want to be able to reach out to you to have an extended discussion on any of the responses that you provided in this episode, how would they be able to get in contact with you?
You are welcome to share my email address and my phone number. I can read off my phone number is 916-798-2543. And in my email address, if they asked, they can reach me through that as well.
Okay. Okay. And I'm going to prank call you.
It's been my same number for so many years, and I have not had a problem. Although I can say the telemarketers are a little.
Oh, yeah. I get those calls pretty frequently. But Roxana, again, truly, truly appreciate you coming on BFE. First, thank you for being a very close, near and dear friend to my heart. Second, thank you for being a cadre in this field, as we both have a very, very similar mindset and the path that we want to take for our kids. But moreover, truly, truly appreciate you, how you're impacting and influencing many leaders, not only in California, but across the country.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and of course, I always enjoy our conversations, and I look forward to the continued partnership and just and being a partner with you through the journey.
Absolutely. We change the world, Roxanne. That's the main goal. And
Yes.
on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.